Welcome back to Crazy Thoughts, your bi-monthly musings from this lazy prick. Now, I should probably mention, as if it isn't apparent already, that I'm not aiming to compete with your news outlets or relevant content creators. I like to let these crazy thoughts toil away in my little mind and let them sink really deep before I even think about putting them on digital paper. As such, the games featured here aren't always going to be super up-to-date, but once again, I'm not trying to be relevant here. I'm just talking about the games that interested me, whether they be from this year or from any previous year. Just anything I played recently and thought would be worth talking about. So with that out of the way, let's go on to this video's bundle of interactive media laid out before us and critiqued by yours truly. Starting with... World's End Club was one of my most anticipated games of the year, because we have the first game from the creator of the Zero Escape trilogy and AI the Somnium Files, Kotaro Uchikoshi, following his leave from Spike Chunsoft to go join the new independent company founded by Mr. Danganronpa and his cronies, 2Kyo Games. I see what they did there, that's very clever. Not to mention, Mr. Danganronpa also had directorial input, as did Mr. Takumi Nakazawa, who Kotaro had worked with on the Memories Off and Infinite series way back in the day. Considering he had the sole writing credit, though, I was of the firm belief that this was a Kotaro project. One that was released late last year on the Apple Arcade, but as is typical with games released on that platform, was left woefully unfinished until the full version came out on Switch earlier this year. Questionable release decisions aside, I was still bracing myself for yet another wacky Kotaro experience. A much lighter and jovial one, as the trailer seemed to be indicating, but wacky nonetheless. And yep, I definitely got a Kotaro experience, though even though I do think it's good, this is probably the weakest project of his that I've played through thus far. And yes, that includes Zero Time Dilemma. What we have here is a bit of a subversion from his work in the past, and in some cases, a complete piss take. This is reflected in the brighter presentation, the fantastic character design done by Take, who's done some art for the most recent Pokemon gens, as if that wasn't obvious already, and how the cast are a bunch of why is that so hard to pronounce? And how the cast are a bunch of 6th graders who are part of a group called the Go-Getters Club, and are on a trek from one side of Japan to the other following a number of events in the game's intro. Mainly a giant meteor attack that took out all of Japan. To be frank, after playing a number of games from these dudes featuring high school students and grown-ass adults trying to murder each other in horrible ways, it is very refreshing to see such a much younger cast of longtime friends and one exchange student. And this cast is easily the game's best aspect. Originally I thought their dialogue was just a little too mature for these 12-year-olds to have, but the more I thought about it, the more they did feel like this Goonies Stand By Me group of rascals, and I kind of love them. Individually, they're fine, but there's this grand sense of camaraderie and friendship when they come together as a group that leads to a lot of fun interactions, and that's definitely Mr. Danganronpa's input there, if I had to guess. Also, they have superpowers, because of course they do. As for the story that they're in, well, it definitely feels like a Kotaro story, a lot of emphasis on weird pseudoscience and some pretty cool twists, but by the end I don't think it quite came together as well as his past works have. Yes, even Zero Time Dilemma. It didn't help that the main villain was, how do you put it? extremely underwhelming. And I won't go into spoilers, but I will say it wasn't the Monokuma knockoff this game has. Because they were kind of funny, or at the very least, a lot better than the other Monokuma knockoff that Kotaro has done in the past. Yes, now having played Danganronpa, I can say that with full confidence. As you can likely tell though, the gameplay is far removed from the visual novel adventure game hybrids they started with. Instead, this club's journey across Japan is separated into a number of platforming stages that have some rather basic puzzle elements, usually based around those superpowers I mentioned earlier. Kudos for trying something different here, because I do think it's a solid design idea, but, well, there's a reason why this game's critical reception is a lot lower than his past works, in that these stages aren't that great to play. To me, they have a similar feel to The Cave, if any of you all remember that, except the player controls are a lot stiffer and the puzzles aren't nearly as engaging, especially since the game has a tendency to just give away the solution without letting us gamers figure out the solution ourselves, which is very weird coming from the Zero Escape guy. Also, just because they've switched up genres doesn't mean there's still a lot of dialogue during these sequences, and unlike before, doing that just kinda kills the pacing. This isn't to say that they play horribly, and they do get more interesting as you progress, but I do understand why this is the biggest point of contention with this game. However, my biggest complaint has to be the way that Kotaro implements his signature mechanic, which I won't go into because, spoilers, but while it's not quite as ham-fisted as it was in Somnium Files, I still didn't care for how he did it here. In spite of its flaws, I still enjoyed the hell out of World's End Club. And this only occurred to me while writing, but kind of reminded me of my experience with the Danganronpa spin-off Ultra Despair Girls, another game that eschewed the Adventure VN style in favor of a more action, puzzle-focused mode of gameplay that you either like or you don't, and is subsequently carried by its strong cast, because that story also got really convoluted by the end. Oh, and they both have great soundtracks too. If you like Kotaro's past work or need a decent way to kill 15 hours or so, I recommend giving this thing a shot. Although maybe wait after the price has gone down a tad. I don't regret getting a physical copy though, it even came with an art book. And a visual soundtrack too. I'm definitely looking forward to what I'm definitely looking forward to what this company is going to do next. And I'm definitely looking forward to AI The Somnium Files 2. Even if Kotaro isn't really that involved with the project. They teased the hell out of a Zero Escape trilogy release on Switch though, so come on fellas, get on that! Mario Golf Super Rush was one of my most anticipated titles of the year, and I don't like it. Next! Okay, I'm just joshing y'all. I don't completely dislike this thing, but seriously, yeah, to get my thoughts away from the start, I was very unimpressed with this thing, which was a big surprise to me because I love me some Mario Golf. I had also thought Camelot was on an upswing during the Switch era too, even though I know some folks were disappointed with Aces, and I didn't put a lot of time into it myself. I had a good time, so why not expect the same here? Those new gameplay modes look really fun and chaotic, and they will also bring back the RPG single-player mode from the portable entries. The only one of which I played was the one in Mario Golf World Tour, and I didn't care for that, but I still had high hopes. However, after the initial hype died down, I took another look at the trailer and felt something was off. And then the next trailer came out, and I felt that even more. Then the reviews started coming out, and I felt that even more. Then I actually played it, and... Now, I will say the mechanics here are fine. I much prefer the standard 3-button press swing meter that every game in the series has had up until now, but this vertical meter setup does the job well enough. I don't think the RNG they implemented here was really that egregious, and I really like the way that they allow you to curve the ball in a multitude of directions. It's a good strategic addition to the standard golf gameplay, but the game really pushes for that speed golf mode, and yeah, it's pretty fun, but is it enough to hold up an entire game? No, not really. I don't think there's enough strategic play involved with this mode, and the movement is not quite as smooth as I would like it to be either. and my buddies and I got very bored with it only after a few sessions. You could still do it by yourself, but there it just kind of turns into a glorified time trial, and once again, it runs out of steam pretty quickly. And I'm not particularly fond of the adventure mode here either. The RPG elements just felt very token, and there was a lot of setup at the start that does not pay off in any way whatsoever. Like, I wasn't expecting a mastercraft tale here, but you get companions at the start that you don't interact with much beyond the start. And if you're gonna do that, why even have them to begin with? Seriously, the best part of this whole mode was the cross-country section, where they plopped you onto the mountain course and let you hack the ball towards any hole you wanted. I know some folks found it supremely frustrating, but I had a lot of fun with it. I love the freedom it gave you, and there's far more strategy here on display than any of the other modes in the game, even the standard golf one. And, frankly, it's far from impossible if you know what the fuck you're doing. I kinda wished it was a separate mode on its own, and it technically is, although what this really ended up being was a trial run for the Battle Golf mode. Here you get a single stadium course to essentially play the same game on, and that runs out of steam in record time as well. After that, there's just not a whole lot to do single-player wise, other than grind characters for their star clubs, which you do by playing courses over and over and over and over and over. You remember when in this game here, all you had to do to unlock the star clubs was just face one character in a single match, and if you beat them, you would get them? What happened to the other swath of modes and challenges that you would get? The ring challenge, the slots, star coins. Something tells me they super rushed this game. Now, they did come out with an update earlier this month, which introduced a ranked mode for the online portion of the game, as well as a brand new course based on Mario Odyssey's New Donk City. I appreciate that there's now a little bit more to do here. However, I have not touched any of the online modes because I have no interest in getting my ass handed to me when I can just kick all my friends' asses playing these games. Seriously, this is the only competitive game that I played against my friends that I'm actually good at. As for that new course, it's like they put a bunch of fairways and greens onto the New Donk City map and called it a day. I didn't even get one match into that thing. So yeah, overall, while I did have some fun with this because it's still Mario Golf, this is easily the worst Mario Golf game that I have played to date. Again, it's not downright awful, but it's just lacking. More power to anyone who can get more out of it than I did. Maybe I should try playing with motion controls and see if that improves my experience. Alright, I'm not even going to offer a build-up for this one. I own both of the other HD re-releases in the Zelda series, and now having played through Skyward Sword HD, I can confidently say this is the most inessential of the three. Wind Waker HD had quite a few changes made to it that I would say make it the definitive version. And while Twilight Princess HD didn't have as many big changes, there was more than enough to make it just as worthwhile. At least to me, because up until Breath of the Wild, it was my favorite Zelda game. Skyward Sword HD, though, just doesn't really offer much in comparison. True, they did a little bit of streamlining by cutting out Fi's incessant commentary, and they finally offered a different control scheme besides the serviceable but tiring waggling of the original. But then they require you purchase a $25 amiibo that gives you an even more streamlined experience, and that pretty much destroyed any good karma they had going for it. The game doesn't even look that much different either, besides the obvious upscale translation. Really, the only major change there was how it now runs at 60 FPS. And that was still more than enough for me to buy this thing at full price. Yes, I'm absolutely a massive whore and hypocrite, but I'm more enamored with the fact that we now have a 3D Zelda game with 60 FPS, and no Link Between Worlds and the Link's Awakening remake does not count. I legit had to make sure that I had this one, because I keep forgetting that I do. With that said, this serves as a good opportunity to dispel my own thoughts about Skyward Sword, and I think it's probably the weakest 3D Zelda game. Yeah, I know, big surprise. It is far from being a bad one though, and it's one of those games that the more times I play, the more things I find to appreciate. Initially, I didn't care for the dungeons because they weren't as sprawling and intricate as past games have been, but I've come to adore the simplified design of these dungeons, and they house some of the best boss fights in the series. The story was also another thing I kept thinking wasn't all that great, but during this playthrough, I realized I actually kind of love it. Yeah, I'm not too crazy about the world building and how it feels like it was only made to give a definitive start point for the stupid timeline, but once again, the simplified nature works quite well. I like the cast quite a bit, and this probably has my favorite portrayal of both Link and Zelda. It does a really good job of building up their companionship throughout the game, and their first reunion during the halfway mark, there are few moments that rival the emotional highs of that scene. It is disarmingly poignant. The game still has too many padding and pacing issues for me to fall head over heels for it though, and no matter how many times they tried to streamline it, I was still very bored with those last few hours. And while those button controls are a nice option, I honestly found them even clunkier than the motion controls. Regardless, while it's nowhere near Twilight Princess or Breath of the Wild levels of greatness, this is still a very, very good Zelda game. It's still a very fun time all around. I just don't quite see the major advantage towards playing this if you have the Wii version, besides that very smooth frame rate. And yes, if they re-release Twilight Princess on Switch and they also give that a 60 FPS frame rate, I'm going to eat that shit up. Because as I said, I am a whore. Before Mario Rush put me through the ringer of disappointment, I had the grand idea to play through the other golf games I had in my possession that I hadn't played yet. First with Hot Shots Golf on the PS1, and then with Everybody's Golf on the PS4, which I acquired alongside several other PS4 games so I would have something to play on that brick. And sure, maybe playing two games with a 20-year difference between them wasn't the best way I could have prepared for Mario Rush, but the hype put me in a mood for super fun arcadey golf. The funny thing is though, Everybody's Golf managed to keep my attention for quite a while, even after Super Rush came out. And not just because it took forever to reach its endpoint, but because it was a much more fulfilling game. I never meant for this to happen, Camelot, but clap hands. They know their golfing shit. Maybe even better than you did. I mean, having made 7 entries in this series up to this point, of course that was going to be likely, but I enjoyed the hell out of Everybody's Golf. Super Rush's vertical meter is fine and all, but there's just something to that simple 3-button press meter that I found much more satisfying, especially with how hard the player hits that ball for each swing. It is very powerful. The ball physics are just right, too. Not too weighty, not too floaty, not too bouncy. It's perfect. Structure-wise, you have to grind through courses to get enough points to face challenge characters, and initially it was a little off-putting, as you start with one 9-hole golf course and have to beat 3 people to unlock the next course, which are the other 9 holes for that course. But the gameplay was so fine-tuned and addicting that I quickly found a good groove with this structure, and there are a multitude of match types and circumstances that keep even the later matches fresh and interesting. Also, and this is a rather bold claim, but I'm gonna go with it, this is probably the best presentation I've seen in any golf game. Each and every course looks fantastic and colorful and vibrant. There's a lot of energy with the characters and the way the camera moves around while tracking the ball. Sure, it's kind of goofy, but there's just so much personality and charm to this that I have not seen in any other golf title. I can put my character in a skirt and give them a ponytail and let them ride in a golf cart for 50 years, and then go fishing. I do have a couple of other quibbles, though. It appears that Sony set aside some of those customization items for microtransactions, which... God, look at this shit. It just does not feel right here. The only other real complaint that I have is the strange way that this game supports PS4 Pro users. It provides an option for 60 FPS instead of the default 30, and while that does sound nice, what it actually does is make camera movements and some other animations 60 FPS, and the rest of it still stuck at 30. And the powers of these two combined make for a very disorienting style that I didn't like. I also doubt this will be one of those PS5 supported games, because it didn't really sell that well. So, whatever. Just stick with 30. Make it a consistent 30. All that said, I'm not sure how else I can put into words how much I really adore this game. I'm gonna let it sit in my head for a little longer, but this could end up being my favorite golf game. And what this all really means is that I need to play more golf games. So let's see what else we have here in the collection that I could... As I've laboriously explained in the past, I am a huge fan of Need for Speed's fun arcadey racing, but going through the series has been a very mixed experience. I still have yet to get to some of the ones older than Most Wanted, which I do plan on doing now that I have Need for Speed Underground 2, but I thought it'd be worth taking a look at where the series is at right now, with its most recent entry, Need for Speed Heat. Following the Criterion reboots, Ghost Games had been put in the developer's chair for the series since the mid-2010s, and unfortunately that's led to what many believe are some of the worst in the series, especially 2017's Payback. Heat was seen as a bit of a comeback though, and a good send-off for Ghost's contributions to the franchise, as Criterion is now back in the saddle, with Ghost getting rebranded and sent off to work in the Battlefield mines. And it's funny because the last game that we talked about, Need for Speed The Run, was that developer's last contribution to the franchise. And, well, I don't already like these parallels. I was just hoping that Heat would at least be a little bit more interesting than that, though, so... what did we end up with? Well, to be honest, I think Heat might be up there with Criterion's reboots as one of the best games in the series that I've played. It is very good. It didn't quite start off very good, though. There's yet another story crammed into it where you're an up-and-coming street racer who links up with some street racer chick and has to fight through the street racing ranks as well as a legion of corrupt cops. Now, I'll admit it's a little bit better than most Need for Speed stories. It's not horribly written either, but it still takes itself way too seriously, and it's just not particularly memorable either. It does serve as an okay backdrop to the gameplay though, which drops us in faux Miami and offers a big open world for us at-home street racers to explore, a la both Most Wanted games, or Burnout Paradise, especially with all those billboards featuring the game's big bad that you can smash through to your heart's content. The actual racing is much better than it was with The Run as well. It controls nice and smoothly, drifting is super easy to pull off, and while the variety of race types here is kind of scant, they're still pretty fun to go through. What really interested me though was how the rapes were races. It's races, you fucking dumb idiot. How did you not realize you messed that up, you fucking dumb idiot? Implemented into Heat's core gameplay loop. See, to progress through the game's story missions, you need to have a high enough reputation to qualify for those events, and a car with a high enough rating to be able to finish those events without being left in the dust ass up. This is complemented with a day and night cycle. During the day, you do races to get money, which can be spent on performance upgrades to increase your car's rating, and during the night you do races and other challenges to increase your player rating and your heat beater, which acts as a multiplier to the amount of reputation points that you get. But the more heat you have, the more likely cops are to find you, the more aggressive they get during police chases, which yes, they're back, and the chances of you getting your shit ruined, thus losing all of those points, goes up way quickly. This is essentially an iteration of the gameplay featured in Most Wanted, and I am all for it. This is a very interesting risk-reward system that gives you a very good amount of freedom in tackling these missions. Unfortunately, there are a couple of things preventing this game from reaching the heights of the series' best. To add on to the issues I had with the story, those campaign missions I talked about earlier featured some very gimmicky portions that I was not a fan of. There weren't any QuickTime events, thankfully, but they still had us do a tailing mission. the gameplay loop also suffers from one massive flaw. Those cop chases have no efficient way to give you a fighting chance against getting your shit ruined. Trying to outrun them with speed alone usually doesn't work, making them crash on their own is a random occurrence at best, and trying to ram them isn't effective either because someone had the head-ass decision to give you a damage meter for your car, and you take damage anytime you hit the police cars. So when you bust into the cops, you take a good busting yourself, and if you get too busted up, you get busted. This is also what prevented me from trying to platinum the game too, which I was all for after I finished it. Then I looked at the list of achievements and one of them read, Escape 100 cop chases. I'm not going to do that. Regardless, Heat is definitely one of the better games in the series that I've played. I'm almost tempted to just completely avoid the other games that Ghost put their hands on, but, I mean, I already have rivals, so I feel like that's inevitably going to come to pass. Looking forward to what Criterion is going to be cooking up next, though. Maybe they might try to reboot the run this time and make it good. And sure, let's just finish this up with a big booba. I've made my way through the illustrious Shantae franchise over the past few years, having been interested in it for quite a while after reading a feature about the series' big comeback in Nintendo Power. And no, it wasn't because of the cute girls. It was because of the cute girls. Despite that, having now played all the games up to this point, I wouldn't call myself a big fan of WayForward's big horn dog magnet. They are consistently good-looking games, even the first one, but I think its brand of Metroidvania explorative gameplay is underwhelming, to say the least. And I don't think I'm alone in that opinion. I also don't believe I'm alone in thinking that Pirate's Curse is the best in the series by a mile. Ironically, the stripped-back approach they made for it resulted in the most fun I've had with any Shantae game, and its story was actually something beyond cute girls fighting over treasure or genies or whatever. I like how it examined Risky Boots, and the dynamic between her and Shantae was very compelling. Sadly, Half Genie Hero didn't quite grip me as much as that one did, although it did have some very impressive level design. And now we have the most recent game of the series, Shantae and the 7 Sirens. First released as another one of those stupid Apple Arcade titles before a full version came out months later. I have here the limited run copy, which I got for some forgotten reason, and then I just kinda put it on the shelf in the shrink wrap for about a year for some other forgotten reason. It couldn't stay untouched forever though, so I picked it up thinking it would be a very easy game to go through, and it most certainly was. And it was most certainly a step back for the series too. Yeah, unfortunately I wasn't very enthralled with this one either. And it sucks because for the first time since Risky's Revenge, WayForward put Shantae in this big explorative Metroidvania overworld rather than a bunch of segmented worlds, which made getting all the collectibles even more tedious. The problem is, this overworld is very tedious. It has an industrial metallic look with some slight variations in the color scheme, and it's just so flat and boring. The actual gameplay is still mostly the same smooth-moving, transformation-based, item-hunting, backtracking-filled affair, and one without much challenge because I upgraded all my abilities before the halfway point. I wasn't that fond of the dungeons either. There's a bit more environmental variation with those, and some of the bosses are kinda cool, but they're not nearly memorable enough to stick in my big dumb horny mind. And that is saying something, because this is Shantae we're talking about. It's tedious in design, tedious in play, very tedious with how it tells its story too, which is just a vacation episode gone awry and features a lot of the same elements it's told before, without any interesting developments until the very end. The best thing that I can say about it is that even with the boring looking environments, it is still a very good looking game, especially those animations. I can also believe that this was just a massive concession on WayForward's part to fit the format of a mobile game, because again, Apple Arcade. So yeah, it's not terrible, it's not unplayable, it's fine, but it's also tedious. I would honestly rather go through World's End Club again 5 times over before I even think about touching this thing again. I will definitely check out the next one though, just give me something with a little more meat to it. Also, bring back Rebecca Ross and Karen Strassman for the voice cast too, or just some other weird combination of voiceover performers. Jaden Animations and Matt Mercer. Sure, why not? So that'll wrap it for this episode of Crazy Thoughts. So what did y'all think of these games? Did you like them? Did you hate them? What would you rate them? Actually, don't do that. We don't rate anything around here. But let me know what y'all think regardless. Next time, we're going to take a look at the new Phoenix Wright game, which is already a month old, so that'll be way overdue as well. And maybe that new Double Fine game that was crowdfunded and not a whole lot of people have heard of. So I mean, you might be interested in it. So I guess I'll have a look at it. Regardless, thank you all for watching. Thank you for the support, and as always, I'll see you later.